Abby Whitaker set 3 jars of peach preserves on the saloon counter and forced herself to lift her chin. Her dress was soaked through with sweat. Her hands shook. The men were already laughing, already saying the words she had been swallowing since she was a girl. Too big. Too slow. Too much. The gambler tossed 2 dimes onto the wood and grinned. Abby's throat closed. Then a chair scraped behind her. A quiet voice said, "Pay the lady what they're worth." And the whole saloon went still as a grave. If this story moves you, please tap that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments, what city or town are you watching from? I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now stay with me to the very end. You're going to want to see what this woman becomes. The summer of 1873 came down on Mercy Creek, Colorado territory like a hand pressing against a wound. Folks said it was the hottest July anyone could remember, and they were not wrong. Inside the Lucky Spur Saloon, the air sat heavy with sweat and tobacco smoke and the sour breath of men who had been drinking since noon. Abby Whitaker stood in the doorway with her 3 jars of peach preserves cradled against her stomach. She was 28 years old. She was a tall woman and a heavy woman, and she had been called every cruel name a small town could think up. She knew what was coming. She knew it the way a deer knows a wolf. But her father had not worked in 3 weeks. The flour barrel was empty. The last egg had been eaten 2 days back. She needed $2. She stepped inside. A man at the faro table saw her first. He elbowed his neighbor and snorted into his whiskey. "Lord have mercy, boys. Look what the heat dragged in." The neighbor turned. He looked her up and down, slow the way a buyer looks at a heifer. "Careful where you step, ma'am. Floor might give way." The laughter came up from the tables like dust off a thrown blanket. Abby walked to the counter. She did not look at any of them. She set the jars down careful one at a time, the way her mother had taught her to set down good china before her mother had died and taken kindness out of the house with her. The barkeep, a thin man named Hollis, with a scar across his upper lip, leaned both hands on the wood. "Miss Whitaker? Mr. Hollis, I brought you the preserves." "I see that. $2 for the 3, same as last summer." Hollis sucked his teeth. He looked over her shoulder at the room. Then he looked back at her. "Ain't last summer, miss." "The peaches are the same." "Times ain't." A chair scraped at the faro table. A man stood up. He was lean and pale and dressed too clean for an honest day's work. They called him Slim Reno, and he was a gambler out of Denver who had drifted into Mercy Creek 6 months back and never drifted out. He sauntered to the counter. He took one of the jars and held it up to the lamp. $2, the lady says. "Yes, sir." "For peaches?" "Yes, sir." He set the jar down hard enough that the wax seal cracked. Abby flinched. Reno reached into his vest. He pulled out 2 dimes. He set them on the counter. He pushed them toward her with one finger. 20 cents. Abby's mouth went dry. "Sir, that's not the price." "It's the price I'm offering." "The peaches are good. They're firm. I picked them myself. I cooked them down with my mother's sugar, and 20 cents, ma'am. You can take it, or you can carry your jars on home and sweat some more in that dress. Don't make no never mind to me." Abby felt the heat climb up her neck. She felt every eye in the saloon on her back. She felt her hands begin to tremble against the counter, and she pressed them flat to stop it. "Then you don't get them," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. The room got quieter. Reno smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Now, miss, let's not be hasty. A woman built like you eat what 3 meals, 4 meals a day. You can't afford to walk out that door with empty hands. Be reasonable." A man behind him laughed. "She ain't been reasonable since the day she was born. Have you ever seen the like of her?" "A whole wagon," another voice called. "A whole wagon without the horse. Take the 20 cents, sweetheart. Buy yourself a biscuit. Half a biscuit." The laughter rolled. Abby kept her hands pressed flat against the counter. Her eyes burned. She would not cry. She had promised herself when she was 13, and the boys had cornered her behind the schoolhouse, that she would never let them see her cry again. She had kept that promise for 15 years. She would keep it now. "I'll take the jars home," she said quietly. She reached for them. Reno's hand came down on top of hers. "Now hold on, miss." His hand was cold. His fingers were soft as a woman's. He smelled of bay rum and old whiskey. "I said 20 cents. I didn't say I was finished bargaining. Take your hand off me." "Aw now. Take your hand off me, sir. I just want to discuss." A chair scraped at the back of the room. It was a small sound, a soft sound, but every man in the Lucky Spur turned toward it like a clap of thunder had broken the roof. Boots crossed the floor, slow, heavy, unhurried. Abby did not turn. She kept her eyes on Reno's hand on hers. A voice spoke behind her, low, quiet, the kind of quiet that did not need to be loud. "Pay the lady what they're worth." Reno's smile faltered. "This ain't your business, friend. I'm making it mine." "And who in the good Lord's name are you?" "Caleb Ward." The name went through the room like a stone dropped in still water. Abby had heard the name. Everybody in Mercy Creek had heard the name. Caleb Ward had been a Union scout in the war, and after the war, he had gone up into the high country and built himself a cabin nobody had ever seen, and he came down twice a year to sell pelts and buy salt and coffee and shells, and he did not speak to women, and he did not drink in saloons, and he did not stand for trouble, until now. Reno's hand slipped off Abby's. He turned slow. "Caleb Ward, heard of you. I reckon you have." "Heard you keep to yourself." "Most days." "Then keep to yourself today, friend. Pay the lady $2. "Or what?" There was a pause. Abby heard Caleb Ward breathe in. She heard him breathe out. She did not turn around. "Or you and I are going to have a long, ugly conversation, and I don't believe either of us has the time." Reno looked at the men at the faro table. None of them met his eyes. Two of them looked at the ceiling. One of them suddenly found something fascinating about his boot. Reno reached into his vest. He came out with $2 silver. He set them on the counter beside the dimes. "Pleasure doing business, ma'am." "Pick up your dimes," Caleb said. Reno did. He walked back to the faro table without another word. He sat down. He did not look at Abby again. Abby stared at the silver. She did not pick it up. She could not seem to make her hand move. Caleb Ward came up beside her at the counter. She still did not look at him. She was afraid to. She was afraid he would look at her the way men always looked at her, and she did not think she could survive that today. "Miss Whitaker?" "Sir?" "You gonna take that money?" "Yes, sir." "Then take it." She picked up the silver. The metal was cool in her palm. She closed her hand around it. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me." Don't thank me, Miss Whitaker. I didn't do you any favor. A man sells his peaches for the price he set. That's the law of the territory and the law of plain decency, and any man who tries to break it ought to be broken first. So don't thank me." She nodded. She still could not look at him. He turned to face her. She felt him turn the way you feel weather change before the rain. "Look at me, ma'am." She looked. He was younger than she had imagined. Maybe 35. He was sun-darkened, scarred down one cheek, and his beard was the color of wet bark. His eyes were gray. They were the gray of a winter sky over the high country, and they did not move off her face. He was not smiling. He was not pitying her. He was looking at her the way a man looks at another man when he has decided to tell the truth. "You got any reason," he said, "to stay in a town that enjoys watching you bleed?" Abby opened her mouth. She closed it again. My father is here." "Where?" 2 miles east, the cabin by Broken Pine." "Elias Whitaker?" "Yes, sir." "He's sober today." She did not answer. "He's sober any day, Miss Whitaker." She did not answer. Caleb nodded slow. "I got a place up the mountain," he said. 3 days' ride. I need a hand. I hunt long stretches and the cabin needs looking after. Cookin', preservin', tendin' to the animals. The work is honest and the pay is fair, and there ain't a soul up there to mock you." "Sir, I can't." "You can." It wouldn't be what?" She felt her face burn. "It wouldn't be proper, sir. A woman alone with a man who ain't her husband or her kin. Miss Whitaker. Yes, sir. Look around this room. She did not. Go on, look. She turned her head. She made herself see the men, the faro table, the cracked spittoon, Slim Reno staring into his cards, the scar-lipped barkeep counting the silver dollars he had taken back from her, the drunk in the corner who had called her a wagon, the mother's sons and the church deacons and the men she had known since she was a child. Every one of them had laughed. Tell me, Caleb said. What's Proper ever done for you? She turned back to him. She did not answer because there was no answer. He tipped his hat to her slow. I'll be at the livery stable till sunup. If you come, you come. If you don't, no harm spoken. You think on it, Miss Whitaker. You think on it hard. He walked out. The saloon stayed quiet for a long count of 3 after the door swung shut. Then a man at the faro table cleared his throat, and the voices started up again, soft and low at first, and then louder like crows after a hawk has flown off. Abby took her 2 silver dollars and walked out of the Lucky Spur with her chin up and her eyes burning. The cabin by Broken Pine sat slumped on its foundation like an old man on a broken porch. The roof leaked in 3 places. The shutters hung crooked. Her mother's rosebush, the one her mother had carried all the way from Missouri in a tin pail, was dead at the front door. Her father had not watered it in 2 summers. Abby pushed open the door. Elias Whitaker was at the table. He had a tin cup in front of him and a brown bottle beside the cup. He did not look up. You get the money. Yes, Pa. How much? $2. Put it on the table. She set the silver down. He swept it into his palm without looking. He dropped it into his vest pocket. There's beans in the pot, she said. From last night. I can warm them. Sit down. She sat. He drank from the tin cup. He set it down. He stared at the bottle. Hollis came by. 2 hours back. She felt the cold start in her stomach. Pup. Said you was in the saloon. Said Caleb Ward stood up for you. Said the whole town's talking about it before sundown. Pa the gambler tried to... I don't care what the gambler tried. He was cheating me. He was... I said I don't care. He looked up at her for the first time. His eyes were red and his cheeks were sunken, and he had not shaved in 11 days. Abby knew it was 11 days because she counted. She counted everything about her father. It was the only way she had ever felt close to him. Caleb Ward, he said. Caleb Ward stood up for my daughter in front of the whole damn town. Pa, you know what they're saying right now. You know what's being said in every saloon and every church porch from here to Pueblo. Pa. They're saying my girl is so pitiful a mountain man had to come down out of the high country to defend her honor. They're saying Elias Whitaker can't even feed his own daughter. They're saying, Pa, please. Saying a girl as big as a barn ought to be a comfort to her father, and instead she's a shame to him. Pa. He stopped. She did not know where the word had come from. It came up out of her belly without her permission, and it came out hard, and her father stopped talking and stared at her like he had never seen her before. The kitchen got very quiet. He offered me a job, she said. Who did? Caleb Ward. Her father laughed. It was not a laugh. It was a sound from the throat. A job. At his cabin, cookin', tendin' the animals. He pays fair, he said. Did he now? Yes, Pa. And what kind of cookin' does a mountain man need from a girl who can't get out of her own way? You think I don't know what he wants from you? Pa? You think I'm a fool girl. I don't think that, Pa. Then say it. Say what he wants. He didn't. Say it. She stood up. She did not know she was going to stand up. Her body did it without asking her. She pushed the chair back and she stood up and she looked down at her father across the table. He looked at me, she said, like I was a person. Elias Whitaker stared at her. That's what he wants, Pa. That's what he gave me. He looked at me like I was a person. And the whole town saw it, and not one man in that saloon would have done the same. Not one. Not the deacon. Not the mayor. Not Hollis. Not you. Sit down, Abigail. No. Sit down, girl. No, Pa. He stood up. He swayed. He caught himself on the table. You walk out that door, he said. You don't ever come back. I know, Pa. You hear me? You don't ever. I hear you. Your mother would. My mother would have packed the bag for me herself. It came out before she could stop it. Her father's face went the color of old ash. He sat down slow. He picked up the tin cup. His hand was shaking. He did not look at her. Get out of my sight, he said. She got. She packed by lamplight. She did not have much to pack. 2 dresses, the gray and the brown, both worn thin at the hips. A wool shawl. Her mother's hairbrush with the silver back, the only thing of her mother's that her father had not sold for whiskey. A tin of buttons. A small bone-handled knife her mother had used for paring apples. Her mother's Bible. She did not pack the Bible at first. Then she went back and put it in. She did not sleep. She sat on the edge of the cot in her old room, and she listened to her father snore through the thin wall, and she thought about every cruel thing he had ever said to her, and every cruel thing he had ever failed to say. And she thought about her mother dying on the kitchen floor when Abby was 19, and her mother grabbing Abby's wrist and whispering, "Don't you let them make you small, baby. Don't you let them." She had let them. She had let them for 9 years. She watched the dark window. She waited for the first gray streak of morning. When it came, she stood up. She picked up her bag. She walked through the kitchen on her stockinged feet so as not to wake him. She set a plate on the table with the last of the bread and a slice of salt pork. She looked at her father one more time. He was slumped over the table with the empty bottle by his hand. She did not say goodbye. She walked out. The road into Mercy Creek was empty at that hour. The mountains stood blue and cold to the west. She could see them from the rise above the cabin, and they looked the way her mother's grave looked under fresh snow, final and beautiful, and not afraid of anything. She walked. By the time she reached the livery stable, the sun was a thin red line along the eastern ridge. Caleb Ward was already saddled. He had a second horse on a lead, a stout little mare with a blaze on her nose. He had bedrolls and provision sacks and a long rifle in a saddle scabbard. He did not look surprised to see her. He looked her up and down once. Not the way the men in the saloon had looked at her, the way a man looks at a partner before a long ride. "Miss Whitaker." "Mr. Ward." "You ride?" "Some." "You ready?" She turned and looked back at Mercy Creek. The sun was rising behind it now, and the rooftops were touched gold, and the smoke was just starting to lift from the chimneys. Somewhere down there, the lucky spur was sweeping out last night's sawdust. Somewhere down there, her father was waking with a dry mouth and a cold plate of bread on the table. Somewhere down there, Slim Reno was playing his last bad hand. She had grown up in that town. She had been baptized in the creek behind the church. She had buried her mother in the graveyard under the cottonwood. She had walked those streets in every season of her life, and she had never once been seen. She turned back to Caleb Ward. "I'm ready," she said. He held out his hand to help her into the saddle. She took it, and in that moment, with her hand in the hand of a man who had stood up for her in front of a whole town, with her bag tied to a stout little mare, and the high country waiting blue and silent to the west. Abby Whitaker thought she had walked out of the worst of it. She thought the cruelty was behind her. She did not yet know that the mountains kept their own kind of judgment, and the mountains were waiting for her, and the mountains would test her in ways the town of Mercy Creek had never dared. The first 2 days into the high country, Abby Whitaker did not speak more than 10 words. Caleb Ward did not press her. He rode ahead. He pointed at things she ought to see, a stand of aspen, a creek bend where the water ran clean, a rock face where bighorn sheep had crossed. She nodded each time. Her thighs were on fire. Her lower back was a hot iron. The little blaze-faced mare under her was patient, but Abby's body had not been on a horse in 12 years, and by the second sundown, she could not get out of the saddle without help. Caleb caught her under the arms when she slid down. He did it without a word. He did not look at her body. He set her on her feet and stepped back. "Walk it out," he said. "Slow. Don't stop till the burnin' eases." "Yes, sir." "Quit callin' me sir." "Yes, Mr. Ward." "Caleb." She did not say it. That night he made the fire, and she made the coffee. She spilled half of it. She apologized 7 times in 5 minutes. He finally set down his tin cup and looked across the fire at her. "Miss Whitaker." "Yes." "You apologize one more time tonight, I'm gonna throw your hat in the creek." She blinked. "That a joke?" "Half." A small sound came out of her throat. It was not quite a laugh. It was the closest thing to one she had made in a year. He saw it. He did not smile back. He just nodded once and went back to his coffee. She slept under a separate blanket on the far side of the fire. He did not come near her. She lay awake a long while staring at the stars, and she thought, "He has not looked at me once. Not the way they look, not even once." And she did not know if that meant she was safe, or if it meant she was so far past saving that even a mountain man would not bother. She closed her eyes. She slept. By the 3rd afternoon they crossed the last ridge and came down into a narrow green valley with a creek running through it, and there at the head of the valley stood the cabin. It was not what she had pictured. She had pictured something rough, something low, a trapper's hovel. What she saw was a 2-story log house with a stone chimney and a porch and a smokehouse out back, and a barn that had been built by a man who took pride in his joinery. There were chickens. There was a milk cow. There was a small fenced garden gone to weed because nobody had been there to tend it. Abby reined up. She stared. "You live here," she said. "I do." You built this?" "Spent 4 winters on it." "Alone?" He did not answer. He swung down off his horse. He started uncinching saddles. After a long minute, he said without looking at her, "Wasn't always alone." She did not ask. She knew somehow the way women always know that there had been someone and there was not any more. She slid off the mare. She walked the soreness out. She helped him with the horses. She did not ask anything else. By sundown she was inside the cabin scraping 6 months of dust off a plank floor with a stiff brush and a bucket of creek water, and her hands were already starting to bleed. The first week was the worst. She burned the cornbread on the second night. He ate it anyway, the black parts and all, and he did not say a word, and that was harder than if he had hollered. On the 3rd morning she dropped the milk pail and lost half a gallon. She stood in the yard staring at the spreading puddle and waited for him to be furious. He came out of the barn, looked at the pail, looked at her face and said, "Cow's still got plenty. Try her again tonight." That was all. She went behind the smokehouse and cried for 10 minutes where he could not see. On the 5th morning, he handed her an axe. Kindling. I've never split." "You have hands." "Mr. Ward, I'll cut myself, Caleb." She stared at him. "Caleb." "Better. Hold the axe like this. Don't swing from your shoulders. Swing from your hips. Your hips know more about strength than your arms ever will." She missed the first 3 swings. The 4th one buried itself in the chopping block. She levered it free and tried again. The 5th swing split a piece of pine clean down the middle. She stared at the 2 halves. "I did that." "You did." "I split that piece of wood." "Yes, ma'am, you did." She laughed. It came out of her so suddenly she startled herself. She covered her mouth with her hand. "Don't cover it," he said. "Sound carries down the valley. Let the elk hear it." She lowered her hand. She kept laughing soft and dry and a little broken, and Caleb Ward turned and walked back to the barn, and she did not see his face, but his shoulders eased some the way a man's shoulders ease when a fever has broken in his house. On the 8th day, she met the rifle. He set up a row of tin cans on a fallen log. He showed her how to lay her cheek to the stock, how to breathe out before pulling, how to brace against the kick. She missed every can. 11 shots in a row. "My arms ain't strong enough," she said. "Your arms are plenty strong. Your fear ain't strong enough yet." "Sir." "Caleb, you're scared of the noise. You flinch before the trigger breaks. Hold the gun like you mean it, like there's a wolf at the door and a child behind you. Then squeeze. She thought of the saloon. She thought of Slim Reno's hand on hers. She thought of the men laughing. She thought of her father slumped over the table. She squeezed. The rifle barked. The center can blew off the log. She did not move. She did not even lower the rifle. She just stared at where the can had been. Again, he said quietly. She squeezed again. Another can. Again. Another. Another. When the row was empty, Caleb took the rifle from her hands. He worked the action. He set it across his knees. He looked up at her, and she saw something that was not approval and was not pity. It was something else. It was the look one fighter gives another after a long round. Miss Whitaker. Abby. He stopped. He looked at her hands a moment, then back at her face. Abby, he said. It was the first time anyone had said her given name kindly in 2 years. She did not cry, but it was close. The wounded calf came on the 11th day. It was a cow-calf pair from Down Valley drifted up through a broken section of fence. The mother had run off. The calf was lame. Its left foreleg was bent wrong below the knee, and there was a tear in the hide where bone had pushed through and pulled back. Caleb looked at the leg for a long minute. Won't make it, he said. You don't know that. Bone's broken clean. Hide's torn. Infection'll be in there by sundown. Kindest thing is the bullet. Caleb. Abby. Let me try. Try what? You ain't a horse doctor. You ain't ever set a bone. The calf'll suffer for 2 days and die anyway. Then I'll learn. On this calf. Today. Right here. I'll learn. He stared at her. It's just a calf, Abby. It ain't just anything. She heard her own voice, and she barely recognized it. There was iron in it. There had not been iron in her voice since she was 9 years old. He looked at her another long beat. Then he nodded. All right. All right. You set the leg. I'll bring you what you need. If she's still suffering by mornin', I put her down. That's the deal. That's the deal. She set the leg. She did not know how. She had watched her uncle set a dog's leg once when she was 12. She remembered the splints. She remembered the cloth wrap. She remembered him saying, "You pull the bone straight before you tie. If you don't pull straight, the leg sets crooked, and the dog limps the rest of its days." She pulled the bone straight. The calf bawled. Caleb held the head. Abby's hands were shaking. Then they were not. She tied the splint. She washed the tear with creek water and salt. She wrapped it in clean cloth from her own torn petticoat. She did not sleep in the cabin that night. She slept in the barn with her back against the calf's warm flank. She woke every 2 hours to check the wrap. By the third check, the calf was breathing easy. By dawn, it was trying to stand. By noon, the calf was on its feet. She came out of the barn with hay in her hair and her dress filthy, and her eyes hollow with no sleep, and Caleb was standing on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. He held one out to her. She took it. She's standing, Abby said. I see that. She's standing on her own. Yes, ma'am. He took a drink of his coffee. He looked out across the valley. He did not look at her when he spoke. You got healin' hands, Abby Whitaker? She held her cup in both hands. The coffee was hot, and her hands were cold, and her eyes burned. Nobody, she said, has ever said something like that to me. Reckon they should have. Why didn't they? He thought about that a long time. Because most folks, he said finally, look at a body and they decide what's inside before they ever ask. You ever been around a horse with a scar across his face? Half the riders won't go near him. The other half look past the scar and find out he's the gentlest animal in the herd. You sayin' I'm a horse? I'm sayin' the world's full of bad riders. She drank her coffee. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. The first stranger came on the 17th day. He was a teamster named Hollander, a German immigrant with a long red beard, and he came up the valley leading a draft horse that was foaming at the mouth and walking on 3 legs. They told me in town, he said, there is a healer up here, a woman. Abby looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Abby. "Who told you that?" Caleb asked. "A boy. A boy at the livery in Mercy Creek. He said his sister got better when she could not get better. He said the woman lives with the trapper up the creek." Abby set her hands on the horse's neck. The animal trembled. "What happened to him?" she asked. "He stepped in a hole. The leg it is not broken, but it is verschlimmert, it is poisoned, it is hot, it is twice the size." She knelt by the leg. She did not know what she was doing. She knew she had to look like she did. She felt the swelling. She felt the heat. She found the swollen pocket above the hoof and she pressed gently and the horse flinched. "Abscess," she said. "It's an abscess. It needs to drain." "Can you—" Yes, I think yes. I'll need a clean knife, and boiling water, and rags." It took her 2 hours. She lanced it. The pus that came out was thick and yellow and stank of the grave. She washed the cavity with salt water hot enough to scald her own fingers. She packed it with clean cloth. She told Hollander to keep the horse in standing water for an hour every morning for a week. "You owe me nothing," she told him. "I owe you a horse. Without him I have no work." "You owe me nothing, Mr. Hollander." He took off his hat. He held it against his chest. He looked at her like she was a thing he did not entirely believe in. "What is your name?" he said. "Abby Whitaker." "Frau Whitaker. I will tell every man between here and Pueblo." She tried to say no. He was already gone before she found the words. She turned around. Caleb was leaning against the fence rail watching her. "You shouldn't have told him your name," he said. "He asked." "I know he asked. What was I supposed to do?" He chewed on that a long moment. "Nothin'," he said. "There wasn't a thing else you could have done. That's the trouble with you, Abby. You can't help being what you are." He pushed off the rail and walked toward the barn. She watched his back. Her stomach did something strange. She did not call after him. The boy with the fever came on the 22nd day. His mother carried him up the trail on her own back. She had walked 9 miles. She was a sodbuster's wife from down on the flats, and the boy was 4 years old, and he was the color of old wax, and his breath came in shallow rags. Abby took him from the woman's arms. The boy's skin was so hot it hurt to hold him. She did everything she could think of. Cool cloths. Willow bark tea when she could get him to sip. She sat with him through the night while his mother slept on the floor by the hearth. Caleb fetched water. Caleb fetched more cloths. Caleb did not sleep either. The boy died at 3 in the morning. Abby was holding his hand when it happened. She felt him slip. She felt the small hand go heavy in hers, the way a thing goes heavy when whatever made it light has left it. She did not cry. She set the small hand down. She crossed his arms over his chest. She covered him with the blanket up to the chin. She woke the mother. The mother did not scream. The mother did not weep. The mother just looked at the small, still shape on the cot and put her face in her hands and rocked. Abby walked outside. She walked to the edge of the porch. She gripped the rail with both hands. She looked at the gray morning, and she did not breathe for what felt like a long time. Caleb came out behind her. He stood 10 feet away. He did not touch her. He did not speak. After a while she said, "I couldn't do anything." "You did everything a body could do." "It wasn't enough. Sometimes it ain't." "Then what's the point, Caleb? What's the point of any of it if a baby can die in your hands and you can't—" "Abby. Can't stop it. Can't even slow it, can't." "Abby!" She turned. She was crying now. She had not noticed she had started. He came across the porch. He stopped 2 feet from her. He did not reach for her. He kept his hands at his sides. "You think I don't know," he said. "I buried a wife and a daughter on this mountain. I dug the holes. I carried the bodies. I sat with my wife 3 nights while the fever took her, and I did everything a man could think of to do, and she died holding my hand. So don't you tell me what's the point. The point is, you stay. The point is, the next mother who walks up that trail finds somebody home. The point is, you don't quit because the world quits on you. You hear me?" She nodded. She could not speak. "You hear me, Abby Whitaker?" "I hear you." He stepped back. He looked away. His jaw worked. "I never told nobody that," he said. "I know. Don't repeat it. I won't." He nodded once and walked off the porch and went down to the barn, and Abby stood there with the rail under her hands and the cold morning on her face and felt something move inside her chest that she did not have a name for. The trapper with the crushed hand came on the 28th day. He had been caught by his own bear trap, an old steel-jawed thing he had set wrong, and he had walked 7 miles with his right hand looking like a piece of meat. 3 of the fingers were the wrong shape. 1 was barely attached. She took that finger off with a paring knife and a candle flame. She did it with him biting on a rolled leather strap and Caleb holding him down. She stitched the stump. She set the other 2 fingers as best she could. She wrapped the whole hand and made him drink whiskey till he passed out. He lived. He left 2 weeks later with a hand he could still use missing 1 finger, and he kissed Abby's knuckles before he rode off, which she did not know how to receive. By the end of June, 4 more strangers had come. By the middle of July, 11 had come. Some she helped. 2 she could not. The 2 she could not, she buried with Caleb in a small clearing above the cabin with proper words and proper crosses, and she carried the names of those 2 in her chest the rest of her life. The cabin began to fill up with things. Bundled herbs hanging from the rafters, strips of cloth she had boiled and rolled and stacked, a wooden box of small instruments she had bought off a passing peddler, a second cot in the back room for patients who had to stay the night, a page of her mother's Bible torn out and pinned to the wall, the page that read, "Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might." Caleb watched all this happen. He did not say much. He built the second cot without being asked. He put a window in the back room. He put a shelf above the hearth for her remedies. One night he brought in a small ashwood stool and set it by the porch step and said, "For waitin' folk." She did not know what to say. She just said, "Thank you, Caleb." And he said, "Mm-hmm," and went to bed. They did not speak of his wife or his daughter again, but every now and then she would catch him looking at her across a room when he thought she could not see. And there was something in his face that was not the look of a man and a woman exactly, and was not the look of friends exactly, but something in between, something that did not have a name yet. And Abby did not look back too long when she caught it, because she was afraid that if she looked too long, the thing would have to be named, and once a thing was named, it could no longer be lived with quietly. So she did not look long, but she felt it. It was the 3rd week of July when the rider came. He came at a hard gallop up the valley, and he reined in front of the porch in a cloud of dust, and he was a young man. Abby half recognized a boy named Tom Beckett, who had been 4 years behind her in the schoolhouse at Mercy Creek, and who was now grown and lean and frightened-looking. "Miss Whitaker." "Tom." "Miss Whitaker, I rode from town. I rode hard." "I see that." "Miss Whitaker, there's something bein' said about you, in Mercy Creek. There's something bein' preached." She felt her stomach tighten. "Preached by who?" "Reverend Boone, Reverend Silas Boone." Caleb came out of the barn. He came up to the porch slow, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's Boone preachin', son?" Tom Beckett would not look at Caleb. He looked at Abby. He looked at her the way a boy looks when he has bad news for a woman he is half afraid of. "He preached on Sunday," he said. "He preached 2 Sundays in a row now. He stood up at the pulpit, and he said your name, Miss Whitaker. He said your name from the pulpit." "What did he say?" "He said, 'Tom Beckett, you tell me word for word. You don't soften it. You don't trim it. You tell me what that man said in the house of God about me.'" The boy swallowed. "He said you was a temptation dressed as mercy. He said a woman of your size and your circumstance, livin' alone on the mountain with a man who was not her husband, was a sign of these last evil days. He said the sick that came to you were comin' to you because the devil works through soft hands, and the softer the hand, the deeper it cuts. He said, go on. He said your healin' was witchery, ma'am. He said it plain. He said the town ought to consider what to do about you before the sickness in your heart spread like sickness in a flock." Silence on the porch. A jay called somewhere down the valley. The milk cow lowed in the barn. The world kept moving the way the world will, even when a thing has just been said that cannot be unsaid. Caleb spoke first. His voice was very soft. He used the word witchery. Yes, sir. In the year 1873, from a pulpit. Yes, sir. And the congregation. Sir. What did the congregation do? Tom Beckett looked down at his saddle horn. He looked at his hands. He could not bring his eyes up. They listened, sir. Caleb closed his eyes. Abby had not moved. She was holding the porch rail. Her knuckles were white on the wood. My father, she said. Was my father in the congregation? Yes, ma'am. Did he stand up? Did he say one word? Did he do anything? The boy's shoulders dropped. No, ma'am. Look at me, Tom. He looked at her. Did he nod, Tom Beckett? Did he nod when the Reverend said those things? A long pause. Yes, ma'am. He nodded. She let go of the rail. She stood very still for a moment, and then she walked off the porch, and she walked across the yard to the chopping block, and she sat down on it. She sat down slow because her legs had quit working the right way. She put her hands on her knees. She looked at her hands. A woman who had been laughed at her whole life had become, in the space of one summer, a woman who was feared. She had not asked for that. She had not built it. All she had done was set a calf's leg and lance an abscess and try to save a 4-year-old boy and fail and bury 2 strangers and stitch a trapper's hand. All she had done was try. And now, a man with a Bible was telling a town she was a curse. Caleb came across the yard. He stopped a few feet from her. Abby. She did not look up. Abby, look at me. She looked up. They called me too big when I was silent, she said. They called me too poor when I worked. They called me a shame to my father when I stayed and a runaway when I left. And now they're calling me a witch, Caleb. There is no shape a woman like me can take that they will not name a sin. I know it. What do I do? He looked down at her a long moment. Whatever you'd have done if Tom Beckett hadn't ridden up that trail. That's no answer. It's the only one I got, Abby. The only thing a body can do when the world starts naming you is keep on being the thing you actually are. They'll catch up or they won't. Mostly they won't. But you don't get to choose what they call you. You only get to choose what you are. She sat on the chopping block a long time after he walked away. Tom Beckett waited on his horse. He did not know if he was supposed to leave or stay. Finally, she stood up. Tom? Yes, ma'am. You ride back. You tell Reverend Silas Boone that Abigail Whittaker heard him. You tell him she heard every word. You tell him the cabin door is open. If there's a soul in his congregation that's sick and needs help, my door is open to them. I will not turn away a Boone or a Beckett or a Hollis or a Reno. I will not turn away my father. You tell him that. Yes, ma'am. And Tom. Ma'am, you tell my father he is welcome to come up this trail any day he chooses. Sober or drunk. I will pour him coffee. I will sit with him. He has a daughter on this mountain, and she has not stopped being his daughter no matter what he nodded to in church. The boy's eyes filled. He nodded hard 3 times. Yes, ma'am. Now ride. He rode. She watched him go down the valley until he was a speck, and then he was gone. Caleb came up beside her. He did not say anything. He just stood. After a long while, she said without looking at him, He's going to come for me, Caleb. Boone, he's going to ride up this trail with men, and he is going to come for me. I expect he will. What do we do? He thought a long time. We get ready, he said. They got ready in the only way a man and a woman in a cabin on a mountain can get ready when something is coming. Caleb cleaned the rifle. He cleaned the second rifle, the old sharps that had been his father's. He counted shells. He sharpened the long knife and the short knife. He walked the perimeter of the yard and noted the sight lines. He did all of this without speaking, because speaking was not what was needed. Abby did the work of the cabin. She boiled water. She rolled bandages. She wrote down in a small leather book Caleb had given her the names of every patient she had treated and what she had done for each one. She wrote down what had worked and what had not. She wrote her own name on the inside cover, Abigail Whitaker Healer, and she did not feel ridiculous when she wrote it. She looked at the page a long time. Caleb? If they take me down the mountain, if they take me to a courthouse, or worse. He set the rifle down. They ain't taking you anywhere, Abby. Caleb, listen to me. He looked at her. If they do, she said. If something goes wrong. If a man pulls a trigger he didn't mean to pull. If I'm carried out of here in a wagon. You burn this book. You hear me. You don't let them have it. There are names in here, Caleb. People who came to me secret. People who would lose their land if their husbands knew, people who would lose their children if their churches knew. You burn it. He held out his hand. She gave him the book. He set it on the mantel above the hearth behind the stub of a candle where it could be reached fast. All right, he said. All right. 3 days passed. On the morning of the 4th day, just past breakfast, the dog Caleb, kept on a chain near the barn, began to bark. Caleb stepped out onto the porch. Abby came behind him. They looked down the valley. There were 6 riders. Not 3. 6. That's Boone in the front, Caleb said. I see him. 3 behind him, I don't know. Town men, hired. And the other 2? Caleb did not answer for a moment. Then, the 5th one's Hollis, from the saloon. She nodded. And the 6th, Caleb. He drew a breath. The 6th is your father, Abby. She had thought she was prepared for this. She had told herself the day Tom Beckett had ridden out that she would be prepared. She was not prepared. Her hand went to the porch post. She held it. Abby. Don't. You don't have to come out. You stay inside. I'll meet him in the yard. No. Abby. This is my fight, Caleb. It don't have to be. Yes, it does. It surely does. If I let you fight it for me, I'll be the same girl I was the day you found me in that saloon. And I am not that girl anymore. He looked at her. He nodded once. All right, he said. Then we meet him together. The riders came up the last rise into the yard and reined their horses in a half circle in front of the porch. Reverend Silas Boone was a tall man, lean as a fence rail, with a long gray beard and a black coat. He carried a Bible in his left hand, held against his hip, the way another man might hold a pistol. He did not dismount. Miss Whitaker. Reverend Boone. You know why I am here. I have a guess. There are charges against you, spoken in town, spoken in the house of God. I have come to give you the chance to answer them before lawful eyes. Lawful, Abby said. Whose law, Reverend? The law of God, the law of the territory, the law of any decent. I see the territorial sheriff didn't ride up with you. The Reverend's mouth tightened. The sheriff, he said, is a busy man. Miss Whitaker, there are 4 counts against you. Practicing medicine without right or license. Living in unlawful arrangement with a man not your husband. Drawing the sick of the town away from godly counsel. And, he paused. And what, Reverend? And the working of arts contrary to Scripture. Witchcraft, you mean? I mean what I said. Say, witchcraft, Reverend. You said it from the pulpit. Don't lose your nerve here in the open air. Hollis the barkeep snorted from the back of his horse. Boone shot him a look. Hollis went quiet. Miss Whitaker, will you come down peaceably, or I will not come down at all? Pardon. I will not be coming down this mountain with you, Reverend. Not today. Not any day. The 3 hired men shifted in their saddles. One of them put his hand on his belt. Caleb let his hand slide along the porch rail until it was resting on the stock of the rifle leaning against the post. The hired man saw the movement. He took his hand off his belt. The Reverend Boone watched all of this. Then he swung down off his horse, slow, deliberate. He came to the bottom step of the porch, and he stopped, and he looked up at Abby, and his eyes went from her face down her body and back to her face. Look at you, he said. Abby's blood went cold. Look at the shape of you, Miss Whitaker. Look at the carriage of you. A woman of decent humility is a small thing, a quiet thing, a modest thing. A woman of God knows her place is the hearth and the cradle. But you, standing on this porch, calling yourself a healer, living on this mountain with this man, wearing his cabin like a queen wears a crown. You are an offense, Miss Whitaker, to God, to nature, to the eyes of any decent, reverend Christian who must look upon Reverend Boone. He stopped. Abby came down one step. She came down another. She came down to the bottom step, and she stood now level with him in the yard, and she was a head shorter than he was. But somehow she did not feel shorter, and her voice, when it came out of her, was the voice she had been growing toward her whole life, and had not known it. "You called me too big," she said when I was silent. "Too bold when I spoke. Too ugly when I dared want kindness. Too proud when I learned to survive. Too soft when I cared for the sick. Too hard when I refused to die quiet. You called my body a sin in the womb of the woman who carried me. You called my hunger a shame the day my mother put me to her breast. You have not stopped calling me names since the day I drew breath in this territory. So you tell me, Reverend Boone, what size must a woman be before men like you let her live?" The Reverend did not answer. The hired men did not move. Hollis would not look at her. Abby took one more step toward Boone. She was close enough now to smell the bay rum on him. She did not flinch. "You came up this mountain with 6 men because one woman frightens you. Think on that, Reverend. Think on what kind of God is so small he needs 6 riflemen to enforce his mercy. You will not speak to me of—" "I will speak. I will speak now. You preached against me from a pulpit. I will preach back to you in my own yard." A horse stamped. Nobody breathed. Abby turned her head. She looked at the 6th rider. "Pa." Elias Whitaker did not look at her. "Pa, get down off that horse." "Abigail, get down." He got down. He moved the way an old man moves. He had not been an old man 2 months ago. He was an old man now. He came forward. He stopped a few paces from her. His hands were trembling, and he kept them by his sides. "You came up this mountain," she said quietly, "with the man who called your daughter a witch. Abby, it ain't like that. It is exactly like that. He said he just wanted to talk to you. He said witchery from a pulpit, Pa. He said it twice. And you sat in that pew and you nodded. Abigail, you nodded. Daughter. Don't call me daughter. Not today. You don't get to call me daughter today, Pa. You used that word up. You spent the last of it the day you watched a saloon laugh at me and didn't say a word." His face crumpled. She did not stop. "You hated me," she said, "because I have my mother's eyes. You hated the look of me because every time you saw me, you saw her and you could not bear it, and you punished me for it. You drank because she died. You drank because you could not father a daughter who reminded you of her. So you made me believe I was the burden, that I was the shame, that I was the heavy thing the angels gave you. You did that, Pa. You did that to a child who never asked for any of it. Abigail, please. Have I told one lie? Look at me. Have I told one lie?" He could not look at her. He could not. His knees folded and he sat down in the dirt of the yard like a man whose strings had been cut. He sat down and he put his face in his hands, and a sound came out of him that was not a word and not a cry, and was something rawer than either. And the 6 riders and the Reverend and Caleb and Abby all stood and listened to a man unmake himself in front of his daughter. Abby did not go to him, not yet. She turned back to Reverend Silas Boone. "You see," she said soft, "you see what kind of grief you rode up here on. You used my father's broken heart for a horse, and you rode it up my mountain. You tell yourself it's the work of God. It is the work of small men using broken men to do their bidding. There is nothing of God in this yard today, Reverend, and you know it as well as I do." The Reverend's mouth opened. It closed. It opened again. He had no scripture for this. Nothing in his book had prepared him for a fat woman in a torn apron, speaking the simple, plain truth in front of his hired men. He raised his Bible. "You will not." A sound came up the trail. A rider. Hard. Faster than Tom Beckett had come. Every man in the yard turned. The horse came up the rise in a lather, and on its back was a young farmer, Abby had seen once before 2 weeks ago when his wife had been a few months gone with child, and he had brought her up the trail just to ask if everything was sitting right. His name was Joe Henley. His wife was named Mary. She was 19 years old and small-boned, and Abby had told her 2 weeks ago, "Honey, you come straight to me when your time gets close. Don't you wait." Joe Henley reined up so hard his horse skidded. "Miss Whitaker." "Joe." "Miss Whitaker." "Joe, breathe. What is it?" "Mary. Her water broke. Yesterday morning. The baby's stuck. The baby's stuck and she's bleedin' bad. And the midwife from town wouldn't come. The midwife said the Reverend said—" His eyes moved to Reverend Boone. His face changed. He understood in one slow, horrible second who was sitting on the horse next to his. "You," he said. The Reverend straightened. "Mr. Henley, you told her not to come. You told the midwife not to come." "I counseled the midwife to—" "My wife is dying, Reverend." "Mr. Henley, my wife is dying because you told a woman not to do her work." He swung his eyes to Abby. He was crying now. He did not know he was crying. "Miss Whitaker, please, please, there ain't nobody else. Please. I rode an hour to get to town, and the doctor was gone, and the midwife wouldn't come, and a boy in the street told me you was up here, and I rode another hour, and Miss Whitaker, please." Abby looked at Caleb. Caleb's face did not move, but his eyes did. His eyes said, "Go." She looked at the 6 men in the yard. She looked at her father on his knees in the dirt. She looked at the Reverend Silas Boone. "Reverend, Miss Whitaker, where is Mary Henley right now?" "That is not—" "Where is she?" Joe Henley answered. "She's in our wagon, half a mile down the trail. I left her with my mother. They couldn't go any further. She was bleedin', Miss Whitaker, she was—" "Bring the wagon up. Bring it now. Bring it fast." "Yes, ma'am." He spun his horse and went. Abby turned to Boone. "Reverend Silas Boone, you came up this mountain to charge me with practicing medicine without right. So watch me practice it, right here, right now, in front of you. You stay on that horse. You stay in this yard. You do not move. You do not speak. You watch what your sermons cost. And when this is over, if Mary Henley is alive, you will get back on that horse, and you will ride down this mountain, and you will get up next Sunday in front of your congregation, and you will tell them what you saw. Word for word. You hear me. I will not. You will. Miss, you will. Reverend, or so help me, I will ride into Mercy Creek myself, and I will stand at the door of your church with the bloodstains on my apron, and I will tell every soul who tries to walk in what kind of man you are. Try me. Try me, Silas Boone." He did not speak. She turned her back on him. "Caleb." "Yes. Boil every pot. Bring me the satchel. Bring me the sharp scissors from the second drawer. Bring me the strong thread. Bring me my mother's Bible." "The Bible. The Bible. For Mary." He went. She stepped back up onto the porch. She walked to the chopping block. She sat down. She put her hands flat on her thighs to keep them from shaking. She closed her eyes for the count of 10. She opened them. Her father was still in the dirt where he had folded. "Pa," he looked up. "Pa, get up." He stared at her. "Get up, Pa. I need you." "Abby, I cannot—" "Get up, Pa. I have a girl coming up that trail who is dying. I do not have time for your guilt. You can hate yourself later. Right now, I need a man who can fetch and carry. Are you that man, or are you not?" He looked at her. He stood up. His knees would not quite straighten. His hands were shaking. "What do I do, Abigail?" "Fire. Go to the woodpile. Bring me an armload. We need every kettle going." "Yes, daughter. Don't call me daughter today, Pa. Just bring the wood." He nodded. He went to the woodpile. The wagon came up the trail 8 minutes later. It was a buckboard, and Joe Henley was driving it standing up, and his mother was in the back, holding his wife in her arms. And Mary Henley was the color of skim milk, and there was a stain spreading across the blanket they had wrapped her in, and her eyes were half open, and she was not making any sound at all. Abby ran. She had not run since she was a girl. She did not think she could run. She ran. She got the back of the wagon and she climbed in. "Mary, Mary honey, look at me." Mary's eyes drifted toward her. They did not focus. "Mary Henley, you look at me." The eyes focused. "Good girl, good girl. You stay with me, all right? You stay right here. We are going to walk inside that cabin together, you and me. All right." Mary did not answer. She nodded a quarter of an inch. Abby and Joe's mother and Caleb together carried her into the cabin and laid her on the second cot in the back room, the cot Caleb had built without being asked, and the moment Mary was on her back, Abby knew. She knew. The baby was crosswise. She had never delivered a crosswise baby. She had read about it once in a torn piece of a midwifery pamphlet a peddler had sold her. She had read it twice, and then 4 times the way a person reads a thing they hope they will never need. She remembered the words, "The hand of the midwife must turn the child. There is no other way. The mother and the child have one chance, and the chance is the hand." "Joe." "Yes, ma'am." "Get out. You go on the porch with Caleb. You stay there till I come for you." "Miss Whitaker, Joe, out." He went. "Mrs. Henley." The mother-in-law was crying. "Yes." "You stay. I need you. You hold her hand. You don't let go." "Yes." "Mary." "Yes." "Mary, honey, the baby's turned the wrong way. I have to turn it. I am gonna have to put my hand inside you, Mary. It is gonna hurt. It is gonna hurt bad. But I need you to stay with me. Do you hear me?" Mary nodded. "Squeeze her hand, Mary. Squeeze your mother-in-law's hand. Hard as you can. Don't worry about hurting her. She can take it. Are you ready?" "Yes." Abby washed her hands. She washed them in the boiling water Caleb had brought to the door. She scalded herself. She did not feel it. She washed them again. She put her hand inside Mary Henley. Mary screamed. Abby kept her face calm. Her face was a lie. Her hand inside Mary was reading what could not be seen the way her mother had once read embroidery in the dark. There was a foot. There was the curl of a small back. There was the head. The head was tucked up under the ribs. The cord was wrapped around the neck. Once. She felt for it. Once. Not twice. Thank God, only once. She slipped 2 fingers under the cord and she lifted it over. Mary screamed again. "You are doing fine, baby. You are doing fine. Squeeze her hand. Mary, squeeze hard." She found the small shoulder. She set her palm against it. She pushed. She pulled. She turned. The baby turned. Mary made a sound that was not a scream and was not a word. Abby pulled her hand free. "Now push, Mary. Now. Push now. Push for me. Push like you mean it. Push, baby. Push. 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 Mary Henley, push." She pushed. The baby came. It came in a slow, wet rush, and it landed in Abby's 2 waiting hands, and it was a boy, and it was blue. It did not breathe. Abby's heart stopped. She turned the baby over on her forearm. She rubbed his back, hard, harder. Nothing. She put her mouth over his mouth and his nose the way she had read once in a piece of war pamphlet from a Union surgeon, and she breathed into him. Twice. Soft. Twice more. Nothing. She rubbed his back again. She slapped his bottom. Mrs. Henley was sobbing. Mary was making a sound that was barely human. Outside the porch was silent. Inside the cabin was silent. The Reverend Silas Boone on his horse in the yard was silent. Abby leaned down close to the baby's blue face. "You listen to me," she whispered. "You little mountain boy. You listen. There is a whole valley out there waiting to know your name. There is a man on the porch who would walk through fire for your mama. And there is a reverend down in this yard who needs to hear you cry. So you cry, little one. You cry for him. You cry." She breathed into him again. He coughed. It was the smallest sound a human being can make. It was a wet, small cough, no bigger than a kitten. And then he wailed. He wailed at the top of his lungs, the long, furious wail of a creature that has just discovered it is alive. And the wail came up out of the back room of the cabin, and through the front room, and out the open door, and it went across the porch and into the yard, and it climbed up into the summer air, and every man in that yard heard it. Abby cried for the first time since the saloon. She cried hard, 2 big, silent breaths, holding the small, wet baby against her chest, and Mary Henley reached up with her 1 weak, free hand, and Abby bent down and put the baby in his mother's arms, and Mary said one word. "Lived." "Yes, honey. He lived. He lived." "Yes." She wrapped Mary. She tied the cord. She delivered the afterbirth. She washed Mary down. She got Mary to drink half a cup of broth. She wrapped the baby clean. By the time she walked out onto the porch with the baby in her arms, the sun was past noon. She had been inside 2 hours. Every man in the yard was exactly where she had left him. Reverend Silas Boone was on his horse. The 3 hired men were on theirs. Hollis was on his. Her father, Elias Whitaker, was sitting on the chopping block with his face in his hands. Caleb was on the porch behind her. Joe Henley was on his knees in the dirt with his hands clasped in front of him, like a man at prayer. Abby stepped to the edge of the porch. She held up the baby. "Reverend Boone." He did not answer. "Reverend Boone, I asked you a question. You have not yet answered it. The baby in my arms is alive. His mother is alive. They will both go down this mountain in 2 days' time, and they will tell their kin and their neighbors and their pastor what happened today. They will tell them you sat on a horse and watched. So I am going to ask you again, what size reverend must a woman be before men like you let her live?" The Reverend Silas Boone looked at the baby. He looked at Abby. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He turned his horse. He rode down the mountain. The 3 hired men looked at each other. They looked at Hollis. Hollis looked at the ground. One by one, without a word, they turned their horses and they followed. Only Elias Whitaker stayed. He sat on the chopping block. He did not move. Joe Henley got off his knees. He came to the porch. He could not speak. He just put both hands on the porch rail and he leaned his forehead against the wood and he wept. Abby gave the baby back to him. "Take him to his mama, Joe." "Yes, ma'am." "Joe?" "Yes, ma'am." "What's his name?" Joe Henley laughed. It came out of him broken. It came out of him with snot and tears and joy. "We hadn't picked one yet, Miss Whitaker." "Then you talk to your wife. Y'all pick a good one." "Yes, ma'am." He went inside. Caleb came up beside her. He did not touch her. He did not speak. After a long time, he said very quietly, "Abby, yes, you just changed the territory." She did not answer for a while. When she did, her voice was small and almost surprised. "Caleb, yes, my hands won't stop shaking." He took her hands. He just took them. He held them between his own. They were rough and warm and steady, and her hands stopped shaking slow, the way a frightened animal stops shaking when a calm body is near. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. The thing that had been growing between them all summer, the thing that did not have a name, the thing she had not let herself look at it, stood there in the yard between them in broad daylight, and there was no looking past it any longer. He did not kiss her. She did not kiss him. Neither one of them was ready, and both of them knew the other was not ready, and that knowing was its own kind of love, the kind that does not rush a thing into a name before the thing is willing to be named. He just held her hands, then very slow he let them go. "I'll fetch your father," he said. "Caleb." "Yes." "He sat in that pew." He nodded. "I know it." "Bring him inside anyway." He looked at her a long moment. He nodded. He walked across the yard to where Elias Whitaker was sitting on the chopping block, and he bent down, and he put one hand under the old man's elbow, and he helped Abby's father to his feet. They came across the yard together. Elias was not weeping anymore. He was past weeping. His face was the face of a man who had spent 58 years pretending he was not the thing he was, and had been found out in one summer afternoon by a daughter he had never deserved. He stopped at the porch step. He looked up at her. "Abby." She looked down at him. She did not yet know what she was going to do. She did not yet know if she had it in her to forgive him, or if forgiveness even had anything to do with what was now between them, or if she would ever be able to call him Pa again without her stomach turning. What she knew was this: she had walked off a porch in a saloon in Mercy Creek 34 days ago with $2 and no future. And now she was standing on a porch she had earned with the cry of a living child behind her, and the man who had broken her standing in the dirt below her, asking with his eyes for a thing he could not bring himself to ask for with his mouth. She held out her hand. "Come inside, Pa," she said. "There's coffee." He took her hand. He climbed the step, and the door of the cabin closed behind them, and somewhere down the mountain, the Reverend Silas Boone was riding back to a town that would by sundown no longer be entirely his. The cabin had 3 coffee cups on the table that afternoon, and the silence between them was the loudest sound in the valley. Elias Whitaker held his cup in both hands and did not drink. His knuckles were white. His mouth opened and closed twice and made no sound. Caleb stood by the hearth with his shoulder against the stone, watching, not speaking, because some conversations belonged only to the 2 people having them. Abby spoke first. "How long have you been sober, Pa?" Elias's eyes came up. 11 days. 11 days. Since the night Tom Beckett rode into town. He came to my door, Abby, after he left you. He stood in my front room with his hat in his hand, and he told me what you'd said. About the coffee. About a daughter on this mountain. I sat at my kitchen table that night, and I poured every bottle I had into the dirt out back, and I have not had a drop since. She did not know what to do with that. She set down her cup. "Why come up the mountain with Boone then?" "Because I thought—" His voice broke. He started again. "Because I thought I thought maybe if I rode up with him, I could keep him from doing something bad to you. Stand between you and him. Be a father to you finally. Even if it was the last thing Pa, you didn't stand between us. You sat on a horse. I know it. You sat on a horse and let him say those things." I froze, Abby. The truth is, I froze. I have been a coward 58 years. I do not know how to be a man on the back of a horse just because I poured out the bottles. She nodded slow. "That's honest anyhow." "It's the first honest thing I've said in a decade." She looked at him. He was so much smaller than she remembered. He had been a tall thing in her childhood, a shadow over the kitchen table. Now he was a small man with thin shoulders and a tremor in his hands, and a face that had aged 10 years since June. "You loved her," Abby said. "I loved her past sense Abigail. And I look like her. You are her face, day for day. The day you turned 12 I came in from the field, and I saw you washing dishes at the basin, and I had to set down on the steps, because for a second, I thought she had come back. And after that, I could not look at you, child. I could not. Every time I looked at you, I lost her again. So I drank. And I let other men name you cruel things in my hearing, because if they named you cruel, I could pretend the woman in my kitchen wasn't her." Abby's eyes burned. She did not weep. She had wept enough today. "That doesn't fix it, Pa." "I know it don't. You broke a child, Pa. You broke me when I was small and could not fight back. I know it. I am not sure I will ever forgive you. I am not asking you to." "What are you asking then?" He set down his cup. "I am asking you for a chair, Abby. Just a chair. In whatever this is you are building up here. I will fetch wood. I will tend horses. I will sit on the porch and wait for patience. I will not ask you to call me father. I will not ask you to love me. I will only ask you to let me be useful in the same yard you stand in. That's all. I can be a hired hand daughter. Let me be that at least." She did not answer for a long while. She looked at Caleb. Caleb's eyes had something in them that was old grief. He had buried his own family. He knew what a father in the dirt looked like. He nodded at her once. She turned back to Elias. "There's a cot in this back room, Pa. The boy and his mama are using it tonight. After they're gone, you can have it for a few days while we figure out what comes next. You don't drink in this house. You don't speak to me unkind in this house. And you do not ever raise your voice in front of a sick person under this roof." Yes, ma'am. And you call me Abby, not daughter. Not yet. Yes, Abby. All right. She picked up her cup. She drank her coffee. Elias Whitaker sat across the table from his daughter and drank his coffee, and his hands shook the whole way through, but he drank it down. That was the first day. Joe Henley and his wife and the baby went down the mountain 4 days later, and the baby was named Caleb Whitaker. Henley and the young farmer told the story of what had happened in that yard to every soul he passed on the road home. And by the end of the next week, the story had been told from Mercy Creek to Pueblo to Trinidad, and there was not a saloon in southern Colorado Territory where the name Abigail Whitaker was not spoken in some shape. The shape of the speaking had changed. A summer ago, it had been too big. It had been whole wagon. Now it was something else. Now it was the woman who turned the baby that the Reverend would not touch. It was the healer up the creek. It was the one Boone tried to bring down and could not. People came. They came in 2s and 3s that first month, and then in 5s and 6s. And by the end of August, there were patients sleeping on pallets on the cabin floor, and on the porch and in the barn. And Abby Whitaker had not slept a full night in 23 days, and her hands smelled permanent of carbolic soap, and she had begun to laugh, the short, tired laugh of a woman who has more work than ours. Caleb built another room onto the back of the cabin. He did it in 5 days with help from 2 patients who had recovered enough to swing a hammer. He built it without being asked. She found him on the roof one evening setting cedar shakes, and she stood in the yard, looking up at him. Caleb Ward. You ought to come down off that roof and let an old man do it. There ain't an old man around here who knows roofin'. My father was a carpenter before he was a drunk. A silence. Caleb sat back on his heels. He looked down at her. You sure? I'm sure. All right. He came down. Elias went up. Elias Whitaker, sober 8 weeks now, set 46 cedar shakes that afternoon, and he did it correct, and when he came down off the ladder he was shaking, but it was the shaking of a man who has used muscles he had forgot he owned. Abby watched him from the porch. She did not call him to her. She did not need to. He came on his own slow and stopped at the bottom step. Roof's tight, he said. Thank you, Pa. The word came out before she had decided to say it. He went still. She had not called him Pa since he had come up the mountain. He did not look at her. He did not say anything. He just nodded twice fast and turned and walked toward the woodpile, and his shoulders were shaking the way a man's shoulders shake when he is trying not to make a sound. Caleb came up behind her on the porch. Abby. Yes. Was that on purpose? I don't know. He did not say anything else. The first refugee came on a Wednesday in mid-September. Her name was Clara Bell. She was 19 years old. She walked up the trail at dusk with a bundle in her arms and a yellow bruise across the left side of her face that ran from her cheekbone down into her jaw. Her right wrist was wrapped in a strip of an old curtain. Abby met her at the porch. Honey. Miss Whitaker. You walked from where? From Pueblo. I walked 4 days. I didn't have nowhere else. Who hit you? My uncle, ma'am. My pa died in the war. My ma died last winter. My uncle took me in and he... You don't have to say it, honey. I see your wrist. He broke it, last Tuesday. He said he'd kill me if I told. I left the next morning before light. Come in. I ain't got no money. Did I ask you for money? The girl began to cry. She cried the way a person cries who has not been allowed to cry in a long time, silent and shuddering. And Abby took her by the unbroken wrist and brought her into the cabin and sat her in front of the hearth and gave her bread and warm milk and did not ask her another question for 2 hours. At the end of the 2 hours, Clara Bell looked up at her and said, Miss Whitaker, what do I do now? Abby did not answer right away. She thought about the saloon. She thought about being 19 herself 10 years ago when she had first started understanding that the world was not going to be kind to her. She thought about her mother's voice saying, Don't you let them make you small baby. Don't you let them. You stay with me, Abby said. You eat at my table. You sleep in the new room. And tomorrow morning, if you are willing, you start helping me. There is too much work for one woman in this cabin. Clara and I have been waiting for you without knowing it. Will you stay?" The girl nodded so hard her hair fell into her face. "I will work, Miss Whitaker. I will work harder than any man you ever had." "I know it." By the end of October, Clara Bell could clean a wound, set a sprain, mix willow bark tea, and read a fever temperature off the back of her own hand. She had a knack for it that surprised both of them. Abby caught her one afternoon explaining to a frightened little boy how the medicine was going to make his stomach feel funny. But the funny would pass, and the way the child relaxed under her quiet voice, Abby stood in the doorway and watched and felt something in her chest that was almost holy. She was teaching. She was teaching another woman to be what she had become. Others followed. A failed medical student rode up the trail in November. His name was Wesley Pratt. He had been thrown out of a school in St. Louis for reasons he would not say at first. He sat at Abby's table for an hour drinking coffee, looking at her hands, looking at the row of dried herbs along the rafter, looking at Clara Bell, stitching a torn bandage by the fire. Finally he said, "I was thrown out for refusing to operate on a Negro patient the way the school taught us." Which was to say, without anesthetic. They said the school's policy was that it was wasted on him. And what did you do? I gave him the anesthetic, same as a white man. They expelled me 3 days later. Abby studied him a long moment. "Mr. Pratt, can you teach Clara to read a medical book?" "Yes, ma'am." "Can you teach me?" He looked at her in genuine surprise. "You can't read." "I can read, Mr. Pratt. I can read a Bible, and an almanac, and a recipe. I cannot read what your books say. I would like to." "Yes, ma'am, I can teach you." "Then welcome." He stayed. An old midwife from down on the South Platte showed up in December with snow in her hair and a leather satchel of instruments she had been carrying for 40 years. Her name was Hattie Mae Ross. She was 68 years old. She had delivered 1,100 babies. She walked into the cabin, set the satchel on the table, and said, "They're saying down on the river there's a fat girl up the creek doing the Lord's work without permission. Figured I better come up and see if she needs an old woman to keep her company." Abby laughed for the first time in a week. "Sit down, Mrs. Ross. You can call me Hattie." "Hattie, coffee." "If it's strong." "It is." Hattie Mae Ross stayed. A black cavalry veteran named Augustus Freeman arrived in February. He had served as a stretcher-bearer with the 10th Cavalry. He had pulled bullets out of 40 men and saved 28 of them, and could amputate a leg below the knee in 8 minutes. He had ridden up the trail because he had heard the woman on the mountain did not turn folks away. "You'll work with everybody up here, Mr. Freeman." "Yes, ma'am." "Black, white, Mexican, Indian. Everybody." "Yes, ma'am. That's why I rode up." He stayed. A Mexican herbalist named Doña Inés Vega came up from down south in early spring. She was small and gray-haired and walked with a stick, and she carried in her shawl pouch the dried roots and ground barks and seeds of 40 plants no white doctor in the territory would touch. She had been called a witch in 3 towns. She had been chased out of 2. She and Hattie sat at the kitchen table the first night and argued for 4 hours about whether yarrow or shepherd's purse was better for stopping bleeding after a birth, and by the end of it, they were laughing and slapping the table and pouring each other coffee. And Doña Inés moved into the back room without anyone having to invite her. By the time the snow melted off the high country and the second summer of Abby Whitaker's new life rolled up the valley, the cabin had become something else. Something with a name. Caleb carved the name himself into a slab of pine and hung it over the porch, and it read, Ward House. Abby stood under it the day he hung it. She looked up at it a long time. "It ought to have my name on it too." I thought about that. And Whitaker House sounded like a place a man would shoot you in. Ward House sounds like a place a body comes to be cared for. I picked the better word. She smiled. "You are a Lion Mountain man, Caleb Ward, and I see right through you." "Mm-hmm. You could have named it Whitaker House. You didn't." "No, ma'am, I didn't." "Why not Caleb?" He looked down at his boots. "Because some night, Abby Whitaker, some night when you and I are both ready and the wind is right and you say yes to a question I have not asked yet, your name is going to change anyway." and I figured I'd save us the trouble of repainting the sign." She did not answer. She could not. He did not press. He just walked off the porch and went back to his work, and Abby Whitaker stood under the sign that bore his name and felt her face hot in the cool spring air, and Clara Bell, who had heard the whole thing through the open window, came out on the porch 10 minutes later and put her arms around Abby's waist and laid her head against Abby's shoulder and said only, "About time, Miss Abby." "Hush, child." "Yes, ma'am." But Clara was smiling. Dr. Nathaniel Crow arrived in June with a black leather bag and a pressed white collar and the certainty of a man who had ridden up a mountain to expose a fraud. He sat at Abby's table the first hour and asked her questions in the tone a prosecutor uses with a witness. Where had she trained? Under whom? By what right? By what scripture? By what authority? She answered every question plain. "I have not trained, sir, except by my own hands. I have read what books I could find. Mr. Pratt has been teaching me anatomy by candlelight for 7 months. I claim no right except the right any human being has to try to keep another human being alive. I claim no scripture. I claim no authority. I have never claimed any. I have only ever done what was in front of me to do." He stared at her. He had not expected the answer. Then she said, "Would you like to see the book?" "What book?" "The book where I write down every patient I have treated. What I did, what worked, what did not. There are 83 names in it now, Dr. Crow. 69 of them lived. 14 of them did not. I write the dead ones down too. I do not pretty up my numbers." He took the book. He read it for 2 hours without speaking. When he set it down, his face was a different color than it had been. "Miss Whitaker." "Yes. Your survival rate on cases I would have refused to take is, Miss Whitaker. Your survival rate is better than my survival rate. On cases I would have taken." "Yes, sir." "How?" "Because I do not turn anyone away. Most folks die from doctors not comin'. They do not die from doctors comin' badly. They die from doctors not comin' at all." He sat in his chair a long time. He did not approve of her. Not entirely. He would never quite approve of her. But he could not look at her book and say she was a fraud, and he was an honest man in his way, and he did not say it. He stayed 3 weeks. He taught Wesley Pratt some things about surgical sutures that Wesley did not yet know. He left without saying goodbye to Abby herself, but a week after he left, a wagon arrived with $60 worth of medical supplies and a note in his hand that read only, "For your work. Use them well. N. Crow." Caleb read the note over her shoulder. He's a hard man to thaw. He thawed. He surely did Abby. The summer of her 30th year was the busiest she had ever known. There was no full quiet day. There was no full quiet night. By August, she had 8 people working under that roof, and Ward House had 3 rooms added on, and Caleb had built a second cabin 100 yards down the creek for the men. And there was talk among the women in the territory of starting a smaller refuge in Trinidad with 2 of Abby's trainees running it. It was in the middle of all this that Elias Whitaker began to cough. It was not much at first. A dry cough in the morning, a scratch in the throat. He waved Abby off when she asked, "It ain't nothin'. Old man's lungs." "Pa, let Hattie listen to your chest." "I said it ain't nothin', Abby." "Pa." "Abby." She let it go for a week. By the end of the 2nd week, he was coughing blood. She sat him on a stool in the back room. She listened to his chest with the wooden tube Dr. Crow had left them. She listened a long time. She moved the tube, and she listened again. Hattie Mae Ross stood by the door. Doña Inez was behind her. When Abby took the tube away, her eyes were already wet. "Pa." "Don't, Abby." "Pa, your lungs. I know what my lungs are, daughter. I have buried 2 brothers from the same thing. I knew the day I came up that mountain. I came up that mountain because I knew." She set the tube down. She looked at her father who had broken her. Her father who had ridden up the mountain with the man who called her a witch. Her father, who had set 46 cedar shakes on her roof and called himself a hired hand, and never once in 11 months under her roof asked for the word daughter back. He held out his hand. She took it. Abby. Yes, Pa. I have got maybe 2-3 months, maybe 4. Hattie will know. Yes, I do not want to die in town, daughter. I do not want to die in that cabin by Broken Pine. I want to die here, under your roof, if you will have me. Of course I will have you. Pa, of course I will. That ain't all I have to ask. Then ask. He looked at her. His eyes were wet but steady. I want, he said, I want to die having been your father, just for a little, just at the end. Will you let me, daughter? Will you let me be that for the time I got left? I won't ask for nothing else. I won't ask for forgiveness. I won't ask for love. I only ask for the chance to sit by a fire with you and call you Abby and have you call me Pa and let an old man die feeling like he was somebody's father once. Will you let me have that, Abigail? She held his hand in both of hers. She thought a long time. What she said finally was, I have been calling you Pa for 6 months, Pa. You did not hear me because you were not ready. I called you Pa the day you set the roof. I called you Pa when you brought me wood the morning Mary Henley came. I have called you Pa in my own head every day since you walked up that step. You have been my Pa the whole time. You only had to let yourself be. He closed his eyes. The tears came down his face, and he did not wipe them. I do not deserve that, he whispered. Probably not. Then why? Because I am not the kind of woman they made me out to be down in that valley. They said I was too soft. Maybe they was right about that one thing. So you sit there, Pa. You sit there and you let me cough that out of your chest the next 2 months. And you let me bring you broth, and you let your daughter take care of you, and you die in this house knowing you was loved at the end. That's all there is. He leaned forward. He put his forehead against the back of her hand. He did not speak for a long time. When she came out of the back room, Caleb was waiting for her on the porch. He looked at her face, and he knew. He did not ask. He just opened his arms. She walked into them. He held her, just held her. He did not stroke her hair. He did not say anything stupid. He held her steady, the way a mountain man holds a frightened horse, and after a while, her breathing went steady against his chest. Caleb. Yes, he's dying. I know. I think I'm going to lose him before I am done forgiving him. Then forgive him faster, Abby. She laughed against his shirt. It was a wet, small laugh. That's bad advice, Caleb Ward. It's the best I got. He held her another long minute, then quiet against the top of her hair. Abby? Yes. I am going to ask you that question soon, the one I've been holding. You ought to know I am. I know, Caleb. And the answer, you'll get it when you ask it. That a yes or a no? You'll get it when you ask it. He smiled. She could feel him smiling against her hair. Mountain woman. Mountain man. They stood on the porch a while longer. Behind them in the back room, Elias Whitaker began coughing again hard, the cough that Abby had heard 100 times in this very cabin from 100 dying men, and she knew the sound and she knew the timeline, and she knew this autumn would be the last one her father would see. She did not let go of Caleb yet. Just a little longer, she told herself. Just a little longer, she would stand in the arms of a man who had loved her without asking, before she went back inside to begin the long, quiet work of saying goodbye to a man who had not loved her enough, and who would in the time he had left, try with all his broken heart to learn how. Behind her the sun went down on Ward House. In front of her, her own life went on. Elias Whitaker lived 11 weeks longer than Hattie Mae Ross had given him. He spent those 11 weeks the way a man spends a small inheritance, slow, careful, trying to make every coin count. He sat on the porch in the mornings and watched the light come down the valley. He let Clara Bell read to him from the almanac in the evenings. He told Abby stories about her mother. She had never heard stories about the night her mother had stood up to a Missouri preacher who tried to refuse her communion for laughing in church stories, about her mother singing harvest songs in 3 keys at once, just to make him laugh, stories Abby had been hungry for her whole life and had not known where to find. She wrote them down in a second leather book. She wrote them down at his bedside while he coughed and rested and coughed again. On the night he died, the first hard frost of October was on the windows, and he held her hand and Caleb's hand and said, "Tell her," and stopped, and she said, "Pa, tell who?" And he said, "Tell your mother I am sorry." And she said, "Pa, you tell her yourself." And he smiled the smallest smile and said, "I reckon I will, daughter." And then he was gone. She did not weep until 2 hours later, when she was alone in the kitchen banking the fire. When she did, she wept hard. Caleb let her. He sat at the table and waited. When she was done, she wiped her face on her sleeve and looked at him across the kitchen and said, "Caleb Ward, ask me that question now. Ask me tonight. Ask me before the sun comes up." He stood. He came around the table. He knelt on her cabin floor in his work clothes, with the frost on the windows and his face streaked with the dust of digging the grave he had dug that afternoon for her father. And he did not have a ring, because he had not had time to make one. But he had a strip of leather he had been working on quietly for 6 months, braided fine, and he tied it around her finger. "Abigail Whitaker." "Yes, Caleb. Will you marry a hard old trapper who has loved you since the second summer you came up this mountain, and could not say so till the man you needed to bury was buried?" She put her hand over his. "Yes, Caleb Ward, yes." They were married in the front room of Ward House by a circuit preacher out of Pueblo who had heard the rumors and ridden up the mountain to see if half of them were true. He said yes when Abby asked him. He stayed 3 days. He preached a small wedding to a small congregation of patients and trainees, and one ancient sober old man, who was Hollis the barkeep, who had ridden up alone 2 months earlier with his hat in his hand and asked if there was work for a man who had laughed when he should not have. Abby had given him work. She did not need to forgive him out loud. She forgave him by handing him a broom. He cried when he took it. He had not been spoken to with civility by a woman in 9 years. He stayed sober the rest of his life. The first daughter, Caleb and Abby, had came in the spring of that year, and they named her Mary after the Henley girl who had been the first soul Abby had pulled back from the dark. Mary Ward was a fat-cheeked baby with her mother's stubborn chin and her father's gray eyes, and Caleb Ward, who had buried one daughter on this mountain 12 years before, walked the floor with the new one through every fever she ran in her first year, and he did not sleep more than 3 hours at a stretch, and he did not complain. The second daughter came 2 years later. They named her Inez after Doña Inés Vega, who had taught Abby that a woman past 60 could outwork a woman of 20 if her hands knew the work. Doña Inés cried when they told her. She did not say a word for an hour. She just sat by the cradle and held the baby's foot and kept nodding to herself slow. Hattie Mae Ross died in the winter of Inés's 3rd year. She died in her sleep in the back room she had slept in for 6 winters with a half-finished cup of coffee on the table beside her bed. Abby found her at first light. She sat down on the floor next to the bed and held the old woman's cold hand and said, "Hattie, you delivered 1,147 babies. I counted. You did not lose a single mother in the time you were under this roof. Not one. You hear me, old woman? Not one." Hattie did not hear her, but Clara Bell standing in the doorway did. Clara was not a girl anymore. She was 28 years old. She had married Wesley Pratt, the failed medical student, 2 summers before, and they had a son, and Clara could now do a cesarean delivery clean and a fever diagnosis cold, and could read a medical book end to end in 2 days. Clara took over the midwifery school that next spring. That was the year the second Ward House opened in Trinidad. Then a third in a railroad camp outside Cheyenne. Then a fourth in a Mexican settlement south of Las Vegas, run by a woman Doña Inés had trained. By the time Abby Whitaker was 45 years old, there were 7 Ward Houses across the territory, and the women who ran them all called themselves Whitaker Trained, and the term had begun to mean something. It meant a healer who would not turn a patient away. It meant a woman who kept records. It meant a place where Black families and Mexican families and Chinese families and Indian families could walk through the front door and not the back, and be seen the same hour as a white banker's wife. Reverend Silas Boone died in the winter of 1881 of pneumonia. He was 61 years old. The doctor in Mercy Creek, who had been called to him, gave him 3 days. On the second day, a young woman the Reverend did not recognize walked into his sick room with a satchel and a sober face. She was small and thin, and she had a bruised yellow scar on the left side of her jaw that had never quite faded. He looked at her a long minute. "Are you?" "Yes, Reverend. I am Clara Bell. I trained under Abigail Ward. I was sent down from the cabin." She sent you." "She did." "Why?" Clara set down her satchel. She rolled up her sleeves. She washed her hands in the basin by the bed. "Because, Reverend, she said no man should die without a Christian at the bedside, and she said she could not get free this week, so she sent me." The Reverend Silas Boone began to cry. He cried weak old tears the way a man cries when something has finally cracked open in him that he has been holding shut his whole life. He cried while Clara Bell, who had been beaten half to death by an uncle 11 years before, and had walked 4 days to get to a fat girl on a mountain, sponged the sweat off his forehead. "Why?" he said. "Why would she?" "Reverend, my mistress did not send me up here to argue with you. She sent me up here to bring your fever down. Now hush, sir. Save your breath." He hushed. He died on the 3rd night. His last word was mercy. It was not clear whether he meant the town or the woman. When Clara rode back up the mountain a week later and told Abby the whole of it, Abby was sitting on the porch with Inez, age 6, in her lap. She heard the story straight through. She did not interrupt. When Clara was done, Abby kissed the top of her daughter's head and said, "Did he ask after me, Clara?" "He did, ma'am, at the end. He said your name twice." "In what tone?" Clara hesitated. "In a small one, ma'am, like a man who had a thing to say and run out of breath before he could say it." Abby nodded. "All right, then. You ain't gonna say more, ma'am." "What more would I say, Clara? The man named me a witch in the house of God, and I named his town a place where Mercy lived after he had run out of it. He died in a bed I sent help to. There ain't a thing left to say between him and me. Some debts settled themselves." She rocked her daughter and did not speak of him again. Caleb died in the 18th year of their marriage. He did not die from anything dramatic. He died from the slow accumulation of a hard life. A bad winter the year before had taken something out of him that did not come back. By the spring, he could not split kindling. By the summer, he could not climb the porch steps without help. By the fall, he was bedbound, and Abby and Mary and Inez took turns sitting with him through the long nights. On the second to last night, he motioned Abby to come closer. She bent down. He was past speaking loud. "Abby, I'm here. I want you to listen now." "Caleb, you don't have to. Listen." She listened. "I did not make you matter, Abby Whitaker. I want you to know that. I only saw that you already did. Every soul that has come up this trail came because of what was already in you. I just had a cabin big enough to hold it. That is all I ever was. That is all I ever wanted to be. You hear me, woman? Caleb, you hear me? I hear you. Don't you grieve me too long. There is too much work. I'll grieve you exactly as long as I please, Caleb Ward." He smiled. "Stubborn. Mountain woman?" "That's right." He held her hand the rest of that night. He did not let go, even when his fingers went slack. She had to pry them open at dawn. He died the next afternoon at 3:30, with his head in her lap, and the window open, and the smell of pine coming in off the slope, and she did not weep at the moment. She kissed his forehead and she said, "Go on home, Caleb. I will come along directly. Don't you go too far ahead of me," and then she sat there with him for an hour before she let her daughters in. He was buried on the ridge above the valley on a clear, flat piece of ground he had picked himself. He was buried in the same earth as his first wife and his first daughter, and Hattie Mae Ross and Doña Inés Vega, and a small wooden cross that read, "Elias Whitaker, who learned how late." Abby sat beside Caleb's grave for a long time the day they buried him. Mary, 22 years old now, tried to come up the ridge to fetch her. Clara Bell stopped Mary at the foot of the trail. "Let her be, child. She has earned the afternoon." Abby came down at sundown. Her face was steady. She walked into the kitchen of Ward House, and she put on her apron, and she said, "What's on the boil?" And Clara said, "Stew, ma'am." And Abby said, "Then let's eat, girls. There is a clinic in the morning." That was that. After Caleb's death, Abby thought she might quit. She thought it for 3 weeks. She thought it hard. It was Clara who turned her. Clara came to her one evening in the kitchen with the medical ledger in her hands. Clara was 38 years old now. Her hair had gray in it. Her hands had the calluses of a woman who had worked. "Miss Abby?" "Yes, Clara." "You are thinking about quittin'?" Abby did not deny it. "Yes." "Don't." "Clara." "No, ma'am, hear me. You cannot quit. Not because Ward House cannot do without you, it can. We have 8 more women trained up this year. There is a girl in Trinidad who can set a hip clean. There is a woman in Cheyenne who can take out a bullet faster than I can. The work is not yours alone anymore. That is the point. You taught us so we could keep on without you." "Then why can't I quit, child?" "Because the new ones still come up that trail, Miss Abby. Every week another one comes. Beat up, run off, hungry, ashamed of her body, ashamed of her name. They come up that trail because they heard the story of a fat girl from Mercy Creek who would not die quiet. You are the story, ma'am. The work goes on without you. The story does not. You have to be at the door of this cabin when those girls come up, Abby, because you are the proof. You are the proof a body can be what they laughed at and still be loved, still be useful, still build something that outlasts the laughin'. You quit, you take the proof with you. Don't you do it. Don't you dare." Abby looked at her a long time. She set down the cup she had been drying. "All right, Clara. All right. All right, child. I will stay at the door." She stayed. She stayed 23 more years. In those 23 years, she greeted every woman who walked up the trail. She kept the cabin door open 11 months out of 12. She read every record from every ward house in the territory. She trained 61 healers herself. She buried Doña Inés. She buried Hollis, the old barkeep, who had become by the end the man who tended the horses and never raised his voice. She buried Augustus Freeman, the cavalry veteran, who had taught a generation of frontier women how to keep a man alive on a battlefield. She watched her daughter Mary marry a young rancher and have 3 children. She watched her daughter Inés become the head of the 3rd Ward House in Cheyenne at the age of 26. She did not marry again. When men asked her, she would smile the small private smile of a woman who had been loved correctly once, and she would say, "Sir, I am spoken for already, even if my husband happens to be on the ridge. Try a younger woman. There are plenty up here who would make you a fine match." And the men, however far they had ridden, would tip their hats and turn around without offense, because there is a certain kind of love that does not need a living object, and any honest man knows the look of it when he sees it on a woman's face. She grew old. Her hair went white. Her hands began to shake. The deep work of medicine passed out of them by the time she was 65, and she did not mourn the loss. She had taught 100 women to do what her hands had once done, and the work flowed through them now the way water flows through a delta and not back through the river. She taught. That was her last decade. She taught. She sat on the porch of Ward House, and a girl would walk up the trail and Abby would say, "Sit down, daughter. Tell me your name. Tell me what they called you down in the valley. Tell me what you came up here for." And she would listen, and she would nod, and after a while she would say, "All right, stay. We will see what your hands know." And another would stay, and another, and another. She died on a Tuesday in August in her 78th year. She died on the porch of Ward House in a rocking chair Caleb had built her 4 decades before, with a half-drunk cup of coffee on the small table at her elbow, and Clara Bell, 63 years old, gray-haired. The head of Ward House for 18 years now was sitting on the step at her feet, reading aloud from a letter that had come up from the new clinic in El Paso. Abby's eyes had closed at some point during the reading. Clara had thought she was listening. When Clara looked up to ask a question she saw, she set down the letter. She did not cry yet. She climbed the step. She knelt by the rocker. She put her cheek against the back of Abby Ward's still warm hand, and she said the way one says a thing to a body that may or may not still be listening. "Go on home, Miss Abby. Go on. Mr. Caleb is up on that ridge waiting on you. You go on and let him take your hand. We have got it from here. We have got it from here, ma'am. You rest now. You rest." Then Clara cried. They buried Abigail Ward beside her husband on the ridge above the valley, in the same earth that held Elias and Hattie and Doña Inez, and a baby boy, and 3 old men who had ridden up the mountain in the wrong years and asked to be remembered. The funeral was held on a clear blue morning. 362 people came up the trail. There were ward house women from 7 states. There were old patients walking on legs Abby had set 40 years before. There were children of women she had pulled out of broken places. There were 2 state senators and a federal judge and a man who had once been a hired gun for Reverend Silas Boone and was now 78 years old and rode up the mountain with his hat in his hand to stand at the back of the crowd and say nothing and weep openly through the whole service. Clara Bell, who had walked up that trail a beaten girl with a broken wrist when Abby was 30 years old, gave the only speech. Clara was a tall woman, now gray as iron, with the steady carriage of someone who had run something her whole adult life. She stood at the foot of the open grave, and she looked out at 362 faces, and she did not have notes. She spoke. "You all know who Abigail Ward was, so I will not stand here and tell you. What I will tell you is what they used to say about her. Down in Mercy Creek, the summer of 1873. They said she was too big to love. They said she was too heavy for a husband. They said she was a shame to her father and a burden to her town. They laughed at her in a saloon. They made a fat girl with 3 jars of preserves into the joke of an entire valley. And then a quiet trapper stood up and asked her one question. 'You got any reason to stay in a town that enjoys watching you bleed?' And Abigail Whittaker said no, and she walked out. And what she built with her 2 hands and her stubborn heart and the man she chose is the reason every one of us is standing on this ridge today. They called her too big to love. But this woman right here in the ground, had a heart large enough to shelter a frontier. Every one of us is breathing today because she would not stay small. Every one of us is here because she would not stay quiet. And every girl who walks up that trail tomorrow with bruises on her face and shame in her chest will be met at the door of Ward House by a woman Abigail Ward trained, and she will be told the same thing Abigail Ward was once told. 'Sit down, daughter. Tell me your name.' That is her grave. That is also her answer." Clara stepped back. The wind came down off the high country, the way the wind always came down off the high country in late summer, and it carried the sound of the creek and the rustle of 362 people standing in clean clothes in the grass. Nobody spoke for a long minute. Then they began to sing. Somebody started it. Nobody was sure who. It was an old hymn Abby had been fond of. A hymn about the river and the morning, and 362 voices picked it up and carried it across the valley and down the slopes and into the towns below, and somewhere in Mercy Creek, a barber stopped sharpening his razor and lifted his head and listened because something had passed in the territory that day, and any man old enough to remember the year 1873 knew what it was. The town that had laughed at a fat girl with 3 jars of preserves had outlived her by no one. Her cabin had outlived the town's pulpit. Her name had outlived the man who called her a witch. Her hands had outlived the hands that mocked them. And on a ridge above a green valley in southern Colorado, beside the man who had stood up in a saloon for her without knowing her name, the woman they called too big to love lay down. At last in earth she had earned, and the work she had built went on without her, and the door of Ward House stayed open, and the next girl was already walking up the trail. She was the proof. She had been the proof her whole life, and the frontier knelt.